Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is the afternoon in the South, and we are here on our YouTube channel for Triad Psych, and we're interviewing Michelle Lovely, the latest addition to our clinical team. Michelle is a licensed clinical social worker, also has a master's degree in healthcare administration. She has an excellent background working with traumatic brain injury, disability services, hospice work, and many others. So, Michelle, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Michelle. I've got a background in social work. Mainly, my background with social work is dealing with individuals with mental health, intellectual disabilities. I did worked several years
You worked
in that.
in the autism space too.
Yeah, definitely. Working with intellectual disabilities, autism. Um, on the weekends, I did that throughout college. Once I was in my master's program and postmasters, when I started my professional career, I worked with hospice, whether or not it was in an inpatient facility or it was in like an assisted living or nursing home, personal care home. And I really got to become very knowledgeable in the hospice world, palliative care, and everything that is needed with end of life or aging in general.
Right. Okay. So let's take it piece by piece. So obviously at Triad Psych, anything neurodivergent related is very close to our heart. So let's talk about your work in that space and who you worked for and what you did.
Yes, all through my college, education, I worked with an agency called Right in the Community. They are based in Smyrna, Georgia, and I worked in their respite house, doing case management, community skills services, and helps them adapt to potentially independence or maybe a group home or living at home by themselves or just helping their everyday life be improve.
And how were you able to be effective in that? Or what are some of your best victories from that time?
Some of my greatest victories within that time is helped a lot of the clients become more independent. When we did the community skills over the weekend, we worked on money management. We worked on just socialization and becoming more independent, communicating with the staff and having that overall confidence build within some of the clients that are able to do that. And it's really kind of helps them be more, self-sufficient and have a morale boost as well as, helping the caregivers.
Right. And those programs make more of a difference than people know because you're reducing social isolation. They're around different people. You can notice some skill gaps you can correct while in the program. So it does make a very big difference as well. I did that work in Massachusetts, so I know the value of it too.
Mhm.
So currently we're in a very new and emerging neurodivergent time. What are your reactions to the current neurodivergent clients you're working with?
One of the big things that I've noticed throughout, my personal life and my professional life, because my mom was a special education teacher when I was growing up, and so I was very interactive with her students. Is once they graduate school, they whether or not they graduated at 18 or they continued and graduated high school at 21, 22, is, the lack of knowledge of, the services needed. When we're in school, we have services that are available to us for, um, long-term care and just resources in general. But once they hit that 18 to 21, a lot of those drop, and families don't, have the resources or the support on getting those services set up, getting Medicaid set up for their child, their loved one, getting waivers, Medicaid waivers set up. And so I've noticed that becoming a trend, um, even since I was a kid working, helping my mom, and through working with right in the community. And so being able to help educate the families and the more independent clients on how to get that all set up.
The beauty of Right in the Community is for a long time it was headed by, I think it was Jerry Pascal,
Hmm.
was her name, and that
Yeah.
Jerry, I admired her to the moon and back. I believe she retired.
Yes.
But she did not follow trends. She was not there to be popular. She knew what her mission was. The place stayed very defined, achieved its goals beautifully, and just never wavered. Whereas other similar collegial organizations, often I felt were constantly changing their mission, changing their protocol. Um, what's the trend? What does the state want? You end up chasing your own tail sometimes in that space. But Right in the Community never did that. Jerry was a defined leader, very secure, and she did great work. And I always
Mhm.
admired them to the moon and back. Um, I think you're right, though, that we get these individuals who are neurodivergent, they finish high school, and other than a paragraph in their IEP about transition, there is no real concrete roadmap or plan. And so that's a lot of the work we do at Triad, that often by accident, that a student graduates, and many times they'll go off to college. They'll go to competitive college, competitive universities, but they really weren't given the skills to be away from home under that academic pressure, having all these choices, the social pressures. And unfortunately, they have that setback where they have to come home and re-enroll in a local school. So that's always been a lot of the work we've done at Triad. What we do try to do is if we catch someone neurodivergent or learning disabled, their senior year of high school, we want to make sure they're prepared for that transition to slide
Yeah.
into health.
And a lot of them don't realize that sometimes they can carry all of their IEP or partial their IEP into the collegiate arena as well.
No, it's an excellent point. Just because you've finished high school, it doesn't mean that what's written in the IEP doesn't matter anymore. And the higher ed institution may want to implement it differently, but it certainly should be on their file at the Disability Services Office. That when I worked at the Disability Services Office at Boston University, we had one big rush when school started, and our second big rush after midterms when we had students who came there with neurodivergence or learning disabilities, and they didn't bother to disclose. And they took the midterms, and all of a sudden we were scrambling for documents. We need justification. Get us your testing. Get us your IEP so we can better help you. But then we're working against the clock. It's much
Mhm.
better to have everything there waiting for you and for you to be self-identified too. Sure.
Mhm.
Right. There you go. So again, why did you become a therapist? It's usually what we start with, but went out of order. So why did you want to enter this very interesting, sometimes upside down field?
Yeah, certainly. So as I implied, is I started in the case management arena, working with different um, abilities in different departments. And I noticed, working in the case management is there's this field and this service that is oftentimes there's a blank. It's not very well versed in certain arenas, and it really kind of drops down on whom is needed and whom's available.
Yeah.
Yes, we, focus on neurodivergence here, but not every facility does. Not every practice does. And so being able to have, someone who has experience working with them outside of the therapeutic practice and implementing all these other services or educating all these other services, I felt like was a good it was good. It was a good next step for me within the neurodivergence. Now, kind of shifting into my other specialty, the hospice and palliative care, the cancer care. Um, Working in that arena, I noticed, you know, looking at hospice, you've got the therapist, you've got the social workers while they're on the caseload. And after the caseload, they kind of fall off. We follow them for 12, 13 months, post, their loved one passing away. But services are not necessarily available or widely available. So being able to provide that follow-up support has been very passionate of mine and very important.
Yeah, I mean, case management is an art form in itself. And
Mhm.
I just don't think you can have effective psychotherapy without effective case management for the patients who need it, which is about 50%. 50% of our patients come in, they do a session, we talk about their issues, and they're on their way. But 50% need help and services outside of the therapy session. I think what made me a very good case manager was that I got a degree in special education before I got my MSW. And special education is a very nuts and bolts field, very much get it done, very much about execution of plans effectively, which led into case management. But oftentimes without that, the therapy will fall flat, especially in areas where there aren't a lot of resources, that things in Atlanta are very spread out.
Mhm.
And the service coordination for people with disabilities or psych disabilities is anything but coordinated.
Right.
Bunch of logs floating down a stream that aren't tied together. I moved here from Boston, which is really a very, people don't, if you haven't been there, Boston's really a very small city. It's not a very big place. And we had trains that got everyone everywhere. And it was because of that geography that we were all on top of each other. Everybody knew what everyone was doing and everyone was networked in together. And it made just getting things done so much easier, so much better to do.
Mhm.
So I get that too. So I think, yeah, good case management is a big part of your skill set, and it's a great, and for me too. So let's also talk about you do a lot of work with TBI, traumatic brain injuries too. Let's talk about how you delved into that and why it matters to you.
As far as the TBIs, I do have personal experience with a TBI. I had a TBI back in 2013, and I really kind of noticed, the challenges, moving forward, having to readdress or relearn different areas of everyday life. My TBI affected my vision. And so having to relearn, or adjust my everyday life based on that visual, disability, on visual concerns. Yes, I still, have vision in my eye. It's just I have lost a little bit of my vision, which has hindered my ability to thrive. And so having to find sources and resources to cope with that has been a really it's been an eye opener. And so being able to help other individuals whom have had TBIs, whether or not it's current, recent, or you know 20 years ago, being helped to process all that and find the peace of mind of, okay, this happened, but it doesn't define me.
Right.
It
And
doesn't change whom I am.
I think that's so important. I mean, when I decided to get a degree in special education, all I thought about was learning disabilities. Then I get my first job at the Disability Services Office, and all these students with traumatic and staff at the university with TBIs came in, and I realized that it's very much the same, that they need very similar interventions, and special education is about anyone who has a disability. But we often don't think of TBIs that way, but it's really, the need for adaptive technology, the need for advocacy, accommodation, it's all the same, very much so. And then helping people in the therapy room, how do you want what do you want your disability identity to be? I had a case where I had to say to a patient, I had to say, look, I mean, you don't seem to want to believe that you have a disability. You're not accepting that, and you're heading into projects or trying to move to the next level, and it's not working because you're not willing to get accommodations. You're not willing to work with the disability services people. So do you want to accept this identity or not? And then sometimes we certainly have people who want it to become their entire identity, that they have a disability. And I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but it's the role of the disability services clinician to help them form that and figure it out too.
Mm.
Let's talk about more your work with hospice and long-term hospice work and that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah. So I worked in hospice for several years. Whether or not it was here in Georgia, but I also lived in Idaho as well. And so I got to know the different struggles or the different services needed in, both areas. Whether or not, we have the transition, we have someone who may have been very independent, live on their own, but now they're learning that, you know, they need additional help, you know, potentially. I mean, got people whom are very independent throughout the whole process, but we have those whom they're declining, they're needing more assistance, in the home, learn talking to the, individual and the families or whomever's, part of their care team, be like, listen, you know, this is, reality. And I want to, keep your reality as, independent as you want, but let's help you stay there. You know, what type of services can we utilize for you to stay in the home that you've lived in for 30 years, or, saying, hey, I do want to move into a facility, what can I do to get there, to get that additional help? And so with me, I help, educate, whom is involved. Okay, this is where we're at. This is where ultimately we want to be. What do we need to do to get there?
Right. So you go in with an end goal that you formulate with all the stakeholders. How do you cope with, and what's the clinical challenge of dealing with end of life patients and end of life situations as a clinician?
With the clinic, end of life goals, we really have to start where the, family is or the, patient is. We don't want to, throw them, straight in, saying cancer, cancer, end of life, if they're not ready. We start where they are. Now we do address it and we do want to give that reality base to them, but we don't want to force the issue if they're not ready to have that issue. And so education on, where we're at, where, we're going to be, and next week, next month, potentially next year, because some patients, hospice isn't 6 months or less. That is,
There's palliative hospice, and there's what is it, palliative, and what's the other term?
end of life.
End of life, right?
Mhm.
And they really have a lot of similarities. I mean,
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah.
I remember once I had a conversation with a woman who was a clinician at the Children's Hospital. I think it was Scottish Rite, and she was the clinician for the neurosurgery unit, which was code for children with traumatic brain injuries. And she explained to me, I don't really let the doctors talk to the parents very much. she really carved her own niche. And she said to me, she said, it's my job to give the parents enough information to process, but not cause a crisis either.
Mhm.
And I think that's a lot of what clinical work is about. But talk about a sensitive situation. I mean, your
Yeah.
child's been in a car accident and suffered some kind of traumatic, especially a traumatic brain injury. How do you navigate that with the parents properly?
Mhm. Definitely, because we don't want to shut them down before they're ready. If you talk to a family or a patient and you really are, focused heavy on a certain topic, but they're not ready, you lost that rapport right there and they're not going to
Right.
trust you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've noticed that hospice people, it's really an art form, explaining to people that, this may be, what is it you want to get done? What are the critical conversations you want to have before you pass away? Do you not want to know? Do you want to be numb about this? What are your choices? What would you enjoy?
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah.
So we talked about the disability service role, neurodiversity. What else should prospective patients know about Michelle Lovely before they come in?
Well, on top of the social work degree that I have, I also recently achieved a second master's in healthcare administration. And what that degree really showed me and really kind of taught me is it helped fine tune my leadership skills, which I have been able to, adapt into the therapy role. But also, it showed me really kind of the fine tune of different insurance programs and what these stakeholders want, what is the political climate with this, insurance, and how do you get a certain entrance set up, whether or not it's, hey, I need Medicaid or I need Medicare. What can we use to get there? And so with that healthcare administration, it really has kind of opened my eyes on the different services needed.
Actually, yeah, and I think having the MHA makes your case management skills that much better in a major way as well. And you're going to be offering a service like a consulting business about using that was it with assisted living? I forget it. It's about
There's different entrances, whether or not it's Medicaid waivers to kind of help you get into the assisted livings services.
and the Medicaid waivers are also critical for our neurodivergent folks
Mhm.
who need to get on SSDI, who will need, the housing waiver or the day waiver as well. Makes a huge
Mhm.
difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much. And those of you out there in YouTube land, you now have a sample of Michelle Lovely. And if you need our services, our website is there. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.